Welcome back to our deep dive into development.
Glad to be back.
In our last deep dive, we explored some really fascinating trends in global development, the really big picture stuff.
Yeah.
But today, we're going to zero in on a specific period, the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
And specifically how capitalism kind of shaped the way it all unfolded.
Right.
First in Britain, then across the pond over to the U.S.
Fascinating stuff.
Yeah, I think so. And, you shared some pretty incredible research and case studies with us. So I'm excited to kind of dig in and see what insights we can pull out.
It's going to be fun.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
We often hear about the Industrial Revolution, but I feel like sometimes we don't really appreciate just how absolutely massive a shift it was.
Right.
Like imagine a world where everything is made by hand.
Yeah.
And then suddenly, boom, machines start doing the work.
Like magic. Yeah.
Like it's mind-blowing.
It really is. And to understand why it happened, when and where it did, I think we need to understand the economic engine behind it all.
Capitalism.
Exactly.
Okay, so capitalism private ownership, profit-seeking, right?
Right.
How did that actually play out in the Industrial Revolution?
Well, imagine you're an entrepreneur in 18th century Britain.
Okay.
You see these new machines popping up, things like the steam engine, capable of producing goods faster and cheaper than ever before.
Yeah.
What's your incentive?
Well, I imagine to invest in that technology, right?
Exactly.
If I can produce more, I can sell more and make more money, right?
Precisely. And capitalism, with its emphasis on profit, really incentivized this adoption of new technology.
Okay.
Factory owners see a chance to outcompete their rivals, expand their market, and of course, accumulate wealth.
Of course.
And Britain was the perfect place for all of this.
So all the pieces are in place. So why Britain?
Well, for starters, resources, right.
Oh.
Britain was practically overflowing with coal and iron.
The key ingredients.
The essential ingredients for those steam engines and for building all those factories, so.
Fuel for the fire.
Exactly.
Okay, but it takes more than just resources to spark a revolution.
Absolutely.
So what else was going on?
Well, Britain also had this culture of innovation.
Okay.
People were constantly tinkering and pushing the boundaries of what was possible.
Yeah, like a tinkering mentality.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay.
And crucially, the government was relatively hands-off when it came to the economy, allowing for a lot of that experimentation.
A little bit of a Wild West situation.
A little bit.
Okay, I like it. So it sounds like a recipe for explosive growth.
It certainly was.
But was this growth without consequences?
Not necessarily. As factories sprang up, cities swelled with people looking for work.
Oh, so there were growing pains.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And this led to all sorts of new social challenges.
Like
poverty, crime, pollution.
Right.
Just to name a few.
So this is kind of like a double-edged sword then. You have incredible technological leaps and economic expansion, but then you also have a segment of society that is really struggling to keep up.
Absolutely. And that's where we start to see that concept of a surplus of production coming into play.
Okay. Too much stuff, not enough people to buy it all.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
So how does that actually translate into hardship for the workers?
Well, imagine you're a factory owner.
Okay.
You have warehouses full of products that are just sitting there.
So what do?
You cut costs.
Okay.
And where's an easy place to cut costs?
Wages.
Wages.
Okay, so even though production is booming,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't necessarily mean that workers are seeing a better quality of life.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense.
So it's not just about, more production, better life for everyone.
It's more complex than that.
It's more complex.
There's like a power dynamic at play.
Absolutely.
So where does the U.S. come into all of this?
Oh, the U.S. was watching Britain very closely. They had their own entrepreneurial spirit, and they saw the potential in industrialization.
They wanted in on the action.
They did, but they did things a little differently.
Okay, how so?
Well, for one, they had an abundance of space.
Right.
Imagine a continent's worth of coal, timber, and fertile land just at your fingertips.
Wow.
That's what the U.S. had to work with.
So they weren't limited by those same geographical constraints that maybe Britain was facing.
Exactly.
Okay, so room to grow, abundant resources.
Mm-hmm.
But what about the government? You mentioned Britain had that hands-off approach.
Right.
Did the U.S. follow the same path?
Not quite. But the U.S. government played a much more active role.
Interesting.
Especially when it came to protecting and promoting American industries.
Okay, in what way?
Well, think tariffs. to shield businesses from foreign competition,
Oh,
land grants to encourage railroad expansion.
so kind of a helping hand.
The helping hand.
Okay, interesting. So even though they had their own unique advantages and they were taking a slightly different approach, did they still kind of run into those same dark sides of industrial capitalism that we saw over in Britain?
Unfortunately, yes.
Okay, tell me more.
The grueling factory conditions, the poverty wages, the social unrest, those issues weren't exclusive to Britain.
Okay.
The U.S. had their own share of struggles, especially when it came to things like worker rights and the distribution of wealth.
Yeah, so it's like this pattern is emerging no matter what the context is, right?
Right.
Like rapid industrialization, powered by capitalism. It seems like it brings both this progress but also pain at the same time.
Yeah, it's this sort of paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
But before we go too deep into that, you mentioned earlier the agrarian question.
I did, yeah.
What is that exactly?
And how did that fit into all of this?
Yes. The agrarian question. It's often overlooked, but it's really essential for understanding this whole transformation.
Okay.
It's essentially about what's happening out in the countryside at the same time that all of these factories are booming in the cities. Essentially, it refers to the shifting power dynamics between landlords and those who work the land.
So similar to factory owners and workers, but like in the agricultural world.
Precisely.
Okay.
So as land ownership becomes increasingly concentrated in the hands of a few wealthy individuals, many farmers are forced off their land.
Okay.
And they have no choice but to migrate to the cities in search of work.
To feed those factories.
Exactly.
Wow, so it's like this ripple effect.
Okay.
One change kind of triggers another.
Absolutely.
And it leads to this massive societal shift.
Yeah, and it's fascinating how the agrarian question mirrors some of the critiques of capitalism that we were just talking about.
Oh, how so?
Well, in both situations, whether you're talking about landlords versus farmers or factory owners versus workers, it boils down to this concentration of wealth and power in the hands of a select few.
So whether you're on the farm or in the factory, same fundamental issues.
Exactly. Of power and control and fair compensation are at play. And so you see these parallels reflected in the political and social movements of the time as well.
Interesting.
Just as workers begin to organize and demand better treatment,
Okay.
you see farmers in rural communities also resisting the changes that were really upending their traditional way of life.
Okay, so it's a good reminder then that progress, especially the kind of rapid progress that we saw during the Industrial Revolution, always comes at a cost.
Always.
And it's important to understand who benefits and who bears the burden of that cost.
I agree.
Absolutely. Well,
But,
we've been focusing on this darker side of industrial capitalism, but there's another aspect that we should probably consider here, and that's the rise of wage labor.
it's an important one.
Yeah, so with the rise of factories, there's this new kind of worker that emerges.
The wage laborer.
Yeah.
Right.
Instead of like an independent artisan or a farmer, people are selling their labor
For our wage.
to factory owners.
Right.
And this has profound implications, I imagine.
For individuals and society as a whole.
So I'm seeing how this is a major shift, right? Before, you were the blacksmith selling your product.
Yeah.
Now you're selling your time
To a factor.
to the factory owner.
Right.
What are some of the implications of that kind of dependency?
Well, for one, it created a whole new level of vulnerability for workers.
Okay.
They were now at the mercy of market forces and the decisions of their employers.
So less control over their own destiny.
Absolutely.
Gotcha.
Like an economic downturn or a factory closure, it could mean instant hardship for a lot of families.
Wow.
And this, of course, fuels debates about fair wages and workers' rights.
That are still going on today.
We're still having today.
You mentioned earlier that capitalism incentivized technology. But couldn't someone argue that it also incentivized exploitation?
That's a great question, and it gets at the heart of the complexities that we're dealing with.
Okay.
While capitalism undoubtedly fueled innovation, it also created conditions ripe for exploitation. The relentless pursuit of profit often came at the expense of workers' well-being.
Right, like we were saying.
And it led to those harsh conditions and inequalities that we've been talking about.
So this isn't really a black and white issue, right?
I don't think so.
There's a lot of shades of gray.
Absolutely.
Unintended consequences, moral dilemmas
Absolutely.
that are woven into this whole narrative of progress.
For sure. And that's why I think it's so important to understand the nuances of this period.
Right.
We can't just label industrial capitalism as good or bad, you know?
Yeah.
It was a force that reshaped the world, for better and for worse.
For better and for worse.
And its legacy continues to shape our world today, so it's a powerful force to study.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great place to pause for today.
Sounds good.
We'll pick back up in our next deep dive and continue to explore this fascinating period in history.
I look forward to it.
All right. Thanks again.
You're welcome.
To everyone listening out there, thanks for joining us on this journey through the Industrial Revolution.
Thanks for listening.
We hope you found it insightful and thought-provoking.
We'll see you next time.